The premise: accept a form as idiosyncratic, then use it, not to imitate or replace, but as a new, unique form.
I recently flew from my home at the Jersey Shore to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to meet and film the artist and inventor Tom Norton. I had just seen some of his jewelry on display at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and heard that he had done some other things as well. Many artists find a style when they are young and stick to it forever. Tom is not that kind of artist. He has explored a wonderful variety of media and styles over his very long career. In my ongoing project of documenting artists with a connection to Philadelphia, Tom seemed like a great subject. Cambridge is the home to some of the world's smartest people. Harvard and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, an institution with which Tom has had a long connection, are within walking distance of the home that Tom shares with his graphic designer wife Karen. Though they drive a Subaru, in my brief perambulation through their neighborhood, there was one make of car that seemed to be everywhere. Tom Norton's pathway to creativity made me contemplate some concepts in logic and methods of reasoning. In deduction, one starts with a general concept and works down to specific instances. Induction is the opposite. Specific instances, objects, facts, and notions eventually lead one to the realization of a complete idea. Tom Norton is a purely inductive creator. He synthesizes the very specific stuff of this world, his memories, experiences, and chance encounters with people, into wonderful artworks and inventions that are always built from the ground up. His brilliance comes from an uncanny knack of making connections between things you'd never think could be combined. He told me that as a child he was severely dyslexic before such a problem was understood. His teacher would ask him to read a story, but after the first paragraph, his imagination would kick in and he would just stare out the window, lost in his creative reworking of the few words that he had read. Somehow, he has harnessed this power of imagining into a life of amazing creativity.
His utilization of unusual materials and unique pieces perfectly captures the adventuresome, do-your-own-thing spirit of the time, when the use of innovative materials developed by 1960s technology helped redefine the concepts of clothing and adornment. I'm Christina Haugland, the Levine Associate Curator of Costume and Textiles and Supervising Curator for the Study Room here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And it's a great honor to have Tom's work and his archive here at the museum. We were thrilled that he offered it to us last year and we were able to get so many great pieces.
One of the great joys of filmmaking is meeting terrific people like Christina. She showed me Tom's sketchbooks and carefully laid out some of the Philadelphia Art Museum's collection of Tom's jewelry. It looks so good on the mannequin, I had to ask her a question. At museum-only meetings, are you allowed to wear this stuff?
No. Not if you want to keep your job.
Tom refers to his jewelry as Apparel Decor. He read parts of an essay about his days in the world of haute couture.
Sometime in 1966, when I was doing graduate work at Southern Illinois University in set design, I was offered the opportunity to work at the Tyrone Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. We would often go to Honeywell Surplus to get stuff to make props with. I started noticing machine parts that were beautifully designed. They reminded me of jewelry. So I bought some, and in my spare time I started making a kind of jewelry out of them. At one point I showed a piece to one of the actresses, and she immediately wanted to buy it from me. Sometime later I brought in more, and the actresses urged me to go to downtown Minneapolis to boutiques and show them. The first time that I went to a store called Anthony's, they bought everything that I had with me at the time. Pretty soon, I was making more with my jewelry than my salary at the Guthrie. So in March 1968, when my contract came up for renewal, I decided instead to make jewelry for a while. I needed decorative chains, so I bought dog leashes. I started going to a place called Berman Buckskins, buying whole splits of suede and cutting them into strips. I started thinking about moving to New York City, as my parents were still living there, so I packed up all my stuff in big cardboard barrels and shipped them to New York. I set up a studio in the basement and started making jewelry. I was making bead necklaces from bushings and bearings from Honeywell surplus. I had leather straps that I would string combinations of larger bearings on. These are the kinds of things that I first started bringing to boutiques on Madison Avenue. One of my father's patients happened to be the editor of Harper's Bazaar. He wrote a letter to her telling her what I was doing. I arrived at her office with my attaché case with a selection of belts. She said that I should go down to the, quote, property room, which photographers would frequent, and pick out things that they wanted to photograph. I filled out a form and left 8 belts. A few days later, I got a call saying that Hero had been there and picked up the star belt and was going to use it in a shoot. Well, Hiro was a Japanese fashion photographer. He was doing covers for Vogue and Bazaar on a regular basis. The stylist was Giorgio Sanangelo. The model was Stephanie Farrow, Mia's younger sister. About a week later, I got a call from Bazaar saying that one of the photos they had taken that day was to be used for the October cover of Bazaar. My father suggested that I visit a store that he had frequented over the years called Alexander's House of Bargains. It was filled with manufacturers' closeouts, thousands of gears and gear blanks. I bought a lot, and I went back a number of times. They would become the materials that I made belts 121 on with. I sold many to boutiques on Madison Avenue. I would arrive at a new store and look around to see who the manager might be. As they were telling me that they only looked at new work on Thursdays and to call for an appointment, I would be in the act of hanging up my rack of belts on a convenient door. The mood would immediately change. Oh, what do we have here? They would start trying them on, showing them to assistants, and calling friends to come see. The Bazaar cover led to my entire entry of New York scene. I had many visits with Pablo Manzoni at Elizabeth Arden. He bought many belts and introduced me to many people. Then I got a call from Look magazine. They were about to go on a shoot in the Caribbean, and they positively had to have a selection of my things by tomorrow morning. I'm not sure I've ever got them back. The experience sort of epitomized the New York scene, which I became tired of. I got a call from a buyer at Federated Retail Stores. I think they managed Macy's and Bloomingdale's. One of the buyers picked up one of my belts and said that they would like to order 200 pieces, please. I said that that was impossible. I didn't have that many parts of that particular belt, and I only made one-of-a-kind pieces anyway. She scowled and said, well, if you won't make them, I'll knock you off and have the belts made in Japan. I replied that what they would do is have the parts stamped out of some sort of metal with some sort of texture around the edge, and they would be plated in either nickel or rhodium, that they would never have the finish or the patina of my jewelry. She stopped, thought about it, and then agreed with me. And at a jewelry booth around Times Square, I found what was a real knockoff of one of my belts. I was enraged, but then I was also amused. The Christian Science Monitor wrote an article on me in February 1971, but by then I was also starting to get interested in printmaking, which led my work to MIT. That's the part that was in the Mourlot print.
In 1968, Tom had an opportunity to transition back from his three-dimensional jewelry design to graphic work on paper.
Shortly after I'd moved to New York City to continue my jewelry making business, I was introduced to a gallery owner in Soho by the name of Rhys Paley. Mourlot Graphics had recently moved from Paris to Greenwich Village, and they were looking for artists to do lithographic editions. Rhys called me and asked me if I had ever done any lithography. I had while at RISD, and so I was commissioned to do an edition there. I had also, by coincidence, recently done some experiments by spraying translucent colored spray paint over gears and washers for my jewelry collection on layers of clear acetate. I showed these to Rhys Paley and Jacques Mourlot, and Jacques said that a similar effect could be done by spraying a thinned-out solution of lithographic touche in an airbrush over jewelry parts onto zinc plates. Multiple plates with different colors of registered images produced my edition. It was a fabulous experience because there I was in the traditional lithographic atelier, just as Toulouse-Lautrec, Matisse, Miro, Leger, Chagall, and Picasso.
The master printers would make a number of proofs that Tom would check and then request adjustments.
Only after the final proof is approved by the artist is the lithographic edition run. The edition is then presented to the artist who examines each one, and finally the artist signs the edition. What a fantastic experience. The day the final edition was presented to me was momentous. And of course, on the day that I brought in some belts of mine to show them, Jacques bought one for his wife.
In 1968, Tom walked into the 3M office on 3rd Avenue in New York City, placed some machine parts that he was using for his jewelry into a new 3M color-in-color machine, and made a print. Thus began his period of electronic printmaking, what Tom calls electrographics. He went back week after week, making prints from collaged magazine and newspaper images. He had taken a class in lithography at RISD and worked with master printers for his Mourlot print, so he was familiar with the printing process known as pre-separated art, in which colors are printed separately in order to build an image. Within a year, 3M had perfected their dyes to be closer to the so-called subtractive primary colors of yellow, magenta, and cyan. The 3M color-in-color machine was to be Tom's major aesthetic medium for the next several years. Unlike what we are used to, where you push a button and the copy of the one image on the glass comes out, this machine allowed Tom to place a number of different images on the glass in succession, as well as control the color for each one. 3M had hired Sonia Sheridan to help develop their machine. Her job was to push the technicians to add more functionality. In 1969, Sonia brought Tom to a workshop at the Art Institute of Chicago, where he used Polaroids and photostats to create complex prints of a model. In 1970, Tom moved to Boston to be with Karen and found that the Spalding Business Products Center had a color-in-color machine. He showed them his work and they let him start printing. He began showing his work to ad agencies and developing a graphics business. He had been using mostly found photographs, but now started doing more of his own photography. And one day, he even tried putting a TV set on the glass. It didn't do much. It would take some 5 years, but eventually he would be connecting the color and color machine to a video camera. In the early 70s, Tom's work attracted a lot of attention. Boston Review of the Arts bought several prints for illustrations in their magazines. The D.S. Warren Paper Company asked artists and designers to create an image based on the radish. They reproduced the images in a book.
I got the one that was on the cover.
RISD gave him a show of prints.
Taking stuff that I found on the road and making collages of them on top of the machine. It was for a show called Crushed on the Highways of America.
Boston's Institute of Contemporary Art commissioned him to make a mural to raise funds for the old Quincy Market. This was later purchased by the Addison Gallery of American Art in Andover, Massachusetts. He had a show at ImageWorks in Cambridge called Magna Dynamic Printing, after 3M's name for its color imaging system. At another workshop with Sonia Sheridan, Tom developed color switching cards that would give him more control over the color output of his prints. 3M introduced a backlighting device, and Tom started experimenting with translucent materials and overprints. In 1971, he met an MIT professor named Tim Johnson, who hired Tom to teach a course in electronic imaging at Spalding. In 1973, the machine was moved from Spalding to MIT Press, and Tom became an MIT research affiliate in electronic imaging. He met Muriel Cooper, the legendary graphic designer at MIT Press. They share the idea that one must find what is unique about a new medium, rather than doing with it what already could be done with an older medium. When Tom taught the color and color machine to MIT students, he did not want them to simply make a collage and print that directly, but to use the new possibilities that he had pioneered. In 1974, he curated a show for Chris Cook at the Addison Gallery of artists who were working with electrographics. He created a series entitled Woman in the Mirror, using a hole rather than a mirror to create visual impossibilities.
So I could photograph the model as if she was looking at the mirror, and then I could photograph her in back of her, which of course this sets up an impossible scenario, but that's what it was all about.
With the help of Robert Solomon, an MIT doctoral student, Tom came up with some very innovative technology to connect a video camera and a CRT monitor to the color and color machine. In 1975, Tom bought the machine at a deeply reduced price and moved to a new studio at MIT's Visible Language Workshop, run by Muriel Cooper. He devised a motorized separation filter wheel attached to the video camera, rigged a backlighting system, and began to experiment freely. He had shows at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, galleries in New York City, and the Netherlands. Amsterdam's Stedelijk Museum bought a collection of his prints. But eventually the 3M company gave up on its color and color machine because it wasn't profitable.
Xerox came out with this machine that you could just push a button and not fiddle with anything and get a perfect print. And so the fact that a few artists really liked it wasn't enough financial reasons to have 3M keep it around. So,
like with the Knights of the Round Table, the era of the color and color machine was over.
through the work on the color machine, I became a research affiliate at the Visible Language Workshop. I had access to all the labs, always talking to people in different departments. And there is this long corridor at MIT that starts at Building 7 on Mass Avenue and goes all the way through to halfway across the campus. And it's called the Infinite Corridor. And at different times, at different offices, light would be in the hallway. And I would say, that's interesting. We're not anywhere near the window, but there seems to be light coming through. And they said, yes, at different parts of the year, we could swear there's sunlight down here. This architecture friend of mine, Tim Johnson, was teaching a course at the time about where light falls at different parts of the year. If you're designing a front hall for a big building, you want to know what it's going to be like in the fall or when it's going to be like in the winter. I proposed this idea to them, said I wonder whether at any part of the year when the sun sets, it will go all the way through to the other end of the building. So it was given as a class project, and 2 students came back with identical answers that yes, it definitely happened, and it happened twice a year. I said, this is great. I'm going to make a poster. So I started gathering pictures of Stonehenge. I also went to the MIT planning office, and they gave me a plan that showed that main corridor. So I produced this poster, and about 2 days before the next time that the event was supposed to happen, I put them up all over the campus. Amazingly enough, people looked at them, saw it, and started assembling. I left MIT to start an illustration business, and I forgot all about this thing that I had done with the posters. 7 years later, I got a call from somebody. It turned out to be the editor of a magazine called Sky and Telescope. He wrote a whole article on this, how I instigated the thing. I had left, but while I was gone, it had become a tradition at MIT. MIT Henge, as they called it. I never called it MIT Henge. I called it MIT Sunset Celebration, but it became known as MIT Henge. The premise: accept a form as idiosyncratic, then use it, not to imitate or replace, but as a new, unique form.
At the dawn of the personal computer age, Tom created an artist's book. He gave a copy to the Franklin Furnace, and that copy eventually found its way to the Museum of Modern Art.
In 1961, I was a freshman at the Rhode Island School of Design. One of the required courses was calligraphy. One of the textbooks we worked from was called The First Writing Book. The introduction and notes were by John Howard Benson, who also produced all the text in part of the book by writing with a calligraphy pen. I attempted to copy some of those pages, and doing so became very familiar with them. 21 years go by. During that time, I graduate from RISD, do graduate work. I also got involved with MIT at the Visible Language Workshop with Muriel Cooper. People there were making artist books and writing the basics for the first computer paint programs on very expensive computers. In 1982, I left MIT to start an illustration business. Wanting to get into computer graphics, I rented a used color terminal. I learned that it needed a computer to run it. I bought a Commodore 64 as a host computer. It actually worked fine. On a fluke, I bought a rudimentary black and white paint program for it called Doodle. It had most of the operations that those fancy imaging programs at MIT had, and type. So I started experimenting. Here I was, sitting at my computer, doing digital layouts. Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign were 20 years in the future. In these digital layouts that I was doing, I placed a margin of space around the blocks of text. Somehow it looked like layouts I had seen before. it was the layouts of John Benson's Arrighi Operaina. And then the inspiration all came together. I would make a pastiche of the Operaina. I ran 2 editions of 30 each, the first in 1983 and the second in 1984. I did give one to the Franklin Furnace. When I was working at MIT with Muriel Cooper, I'd gotten to know a friend of hers, Jackie Casey. She had designed many posters for many exhibits at the MIT galleries. After she had read my book cover to cover, she smiled and said, "Tom, send this to the ITC Type Directors Show contest and do it soon because their deadline is coming up." Computera won that award. It was probably the first book in one of their exhibitions that had been entirely composed and imaged with a computer.
Reader, if you find aught to offend in this little treatise of Vincenti, no, do not be amazed, because it is divine, not human, to be quite without fault.
User, if you find offense in the abominations of what I have dared here to draw comparisons to calligraphy, try not to be too exasperated, for as it is well known that humans are sometimes incorrect in their judgments, to really fuck up, you need a computer. Well, when I first bought the Commodore 64, I didn't know BASIC at all. And so I talked to some people that I knew at MIT, some graduate students. They said they could write some programs for me in BASIC. They came over and helped me. I think I paid them something for it. They wrote me a bunch of programs. First, how to get into the machine itself, and then how to draw a circle, how to draw a square, how to do gradations, and all the different steps. I took those and I would make copies of them and variations of them.
So you more or less took these examples and taught yourself how to do it?
Yes. It was a fun time.
The personal computer age had dawned, and Tom embraced it. He began to use computers for his illustration business. At first, he used his Commodore 64 with a Tektronix 427 color terminal. There were no computer printers yet, so he used a film recording device that he had built to photograph the image on the curved monitor. After seeing one at a SIGGRAPH convention in 1985, he bought an Invention personal graphics system. He created graphics with it for magazines and books, sometimes combining the Invention with his own programming code.
Is this the code for it?
That could well
it
have
might
been
have
the code.
been.
Yeah.
As I know myself, you kind of forget what you've done. This stuff made perfect sense at one time to Tom.
Right.
Tom, what does that mean? What does that mean? No, I'm just kidding.
I could specify where the rectangles and polygons that I wanted to colorize, and I would start the gradation on one side and control what colors it went through as it went to the other side by programming. I got a call from somebody at NASA who wanted to know what algorithm I had used for the computer program he thought was based on a thermography photograph. And he was very disappointed when I said that I had actually, in effect, painted it.
In 1986, Tom got hired by the Boston Museum School to take over a class from a professor on a leave of absence. He taught a life drawing class using a Commodore Amiga computer. He ended up staying for 7 years. In 1987, Karen was hired by Polaroid Corporation to work for 3 months. They liked her so much that when the 3 months were done, they offered her a Macintosh computer if she would stay. Tom thoroughly enjoyed using his wife's computer. Tom was making large, complex images of a nude model interacting with a chair. At the opening of a faculty show in 1989, he had his model casually pull off her dress and begin performing with the chair in front of his print. It apparently was quite a popular piece of performance art. A highlight of Tom's career happened when Richard Benson, the son of RISD calligraphy professor John Howard Benson, reproduced one of Tom's prints in a book.
He called me up one day and he said, I'm putting together this book and I've got this print you gave me. Would you mind if I put it in my book? And I said, no, I wouldn't mind at all. The book was published by the Museum of Modern Art, and I've given all my pictures that are in the book to the museum, and I'm having a show of all those. So you're going to be in the show. I said, that's great. Got me the information, I went to it. And this is the book, and that's the image in the book. So that's in one of the collections that I'm at MoMA.
In addition to his many modes of art making, Tom has also received 3 patents for inventions. On a vacation, he enjoyed taking daily sauna baths, which gave him the very unusual idea of making an inflatable air sauna. Tom told me that the sauna's co-inventor was Tim Johnson. The sauna was made from PVC-coated nylon and ran on propane. It was completely collapsible. Tom said it worked beautifully, and they enjoyed many saunas, but then the energy crunch came along. Their air sauna became obsolete. Tom also invented a frameless picture hanger and a color wheel that made his work with the 3M color and color machine much more efficient.
I would do a lot of colorations by printing in one color in one area and then printing another specific color in the other area. But in order to get those colors, it was really experimental. You'd print one color, it wouldn't be quite yellow enough, so you'd make another print, and you turn the dial a little bit, and you'd make the next print, but every print was costing you over $1. And so I wanted to develop a way to do the calculations of the color before I made the print.
Tom built his analog color calculator long before Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator existed. By moving 3 films around, you can get perfect color complements, triads, and analogous step gradations between them.
It makes sense if you have colors that are perfectly aligned like that. It makes sense to you. They sing together on the page. And this enables you to find that.
He also built, from scratch, all the machines that he uses to make his walnut drawing ink and drawing sticks. Technology changes, but key aesthetic concepts do not. Since the beginning of the art form known as collage, artists have sought to cut out parts of pictures and rearrange them to create a new image. This involves removing or masking the unwanted parts. Nowadays, this masking can be done quite easily using Adobe Photoshop, but Tom's electrographics work preceded Photoshop by a number of years. After the 3M color and color machine was discontinued, Tom had an opportunity to switch to a new medium.
I had started making friends with people at Polaroid, and I started being offered free film. And so I thought maybe there was a way that I could incorporate everything that I'd been doing with the 3M machine in Polaroid.
He began improvising. They gave him a small plastic Polaroid camera. He made a little clip out of a bent piece of coat hanger wire that would hold the shutter button open so he could make double exposures. He developed what he called his photo masking technique by making positive and negative separations. The dark parts of a separation would prevent exposure of the Polaroid film. By using the positive separation for one exposure and the negative for another, he could anticipate Photoshop by years. would also move the subject during exposures or see what he got by waving a small flashlight. Then he'd take his prints over to Polaroid and show them to his friends there. They were very encouraging and responded by giving him more film. As time went by, they gave him larger and larger formats, 4.5 inch, then 8 by 10. He started making double exposures with video as well as live subjects. He was offered 4 sessions with a Polaroid 20 by 24 inch camera. He came up with all sorts of complicated techniques and produced, in my opinion, some of the most beautiful images in his artistic career. He wrote to me, "It was an incredible experience with all this equipment, master photographer, technician, the dancer, and me as director. After each set of exposures, equipment moving, strobe lights flashing, and the dancer jumping, the technician would go about developing the image. After the negative and print paper slowly came out of the bottom of the camera, it would be sliced off with a mat knife and tacked up to a bulletin board on the wall with push pins. Technicians, model, and I would be standing there waiting for the timer to sound. Then, bzzz, and the technician would reach up and grasp the upper corners of the negative. Then in one smooth action, he would peel the negative sheet down, and there would be the finished print in full color. It was the visual culmination of our performances."
When Tom is developing an idea, it's often a very highly developed visual process. He could be looking off in space, he's moving his hands, and I know from living with him for a long time that he's really designing something in his head, and then he'll sit down and he will draw it out in great detail and then act on it.
Drawing has been a continuous feature of Tom's creative life. He told me that when he applied to RISD, prospective students were asked to draw a chair from various angles. A few hours later, they were told to draw the chair from memory. Tom aced the test and was accepted. It was at RISD that his love of life drawing began. He learned
using a viscous brown drawing ink.
In 1996, he thought he'd buy some more of that sepia ink he loved so much, but
I looked all over for it, but I couldn't find it. That is, the original ink that I had used at RISD. I bought a bottle of every kind of brown ink I could find and found them all to be watery and in tones that ranged from blackish brown to pink. The only thick inks were acrylic, and they were somewhat opaque, and none of them were light-fast. So I decided to somehow make my own brown ink. Having mixed chemicals in photography and having made scenic paint in theater from glue sizing and powdered pigment, the idea didn't daunt me. I did extensive research and eventually found some European ingredients that were suitable for my purpose. After some experimentation for proper proportions and designing my manufacturing process, I came up with an ink very close to what I remembered that 60s ink to be like. Encouraged by many fellow professional artists who all loved the ink, I decided to go into business. And now I sell to 225 stores across the country and growing. I call my ink Walnut Drawing Ink.
So how many cases theoretically could you do in a real busy day?
I could make about 9 cases a day, but I would be doing other things at the same time. I'd do a case of ink, and then I'd work on some drawing sticks, and then I'd do another case of ink, and then pack a couple boxes, and then do another case of ink. It's very monotonous, it's very intense. You have to concentrate very hard when you're doing each one. And to do 3 cases in a row, your fingers get a little numb, and your mind starts to wander a little bit.
Have you ever thought about getting an unpaid student as your intern?
Then I'd have to pay, an unpaid, no. That doesn't, I don't think that exists.
Unpaid interns, that's the way of the world.
It is entirely water soluble. It has a completely naturally derived ingredients, having an almost neutral pH of 8.8. It has a slight viscosity from a water-based neutral binder, which makes it hold well in a brush or hand-dipped pen. It has an extremely fine brown pigmentation, which lets you build a drawing by overlapping layers of washes, like a watercolor, but it comes in a consistent, concentrated, liquefied form that can be diluted for lighter tones. It's made from a naturally derived proprietary substance, not walnut. Real walnut ink used for centuries is not only very acidic, but it's also a black ink. Furthermore, being a vegetable dye, it's not light fast and only fades to those wonderful brown tones after many years.
On Facebook, I found 3 devoted fans of Tom's walnut drawing ink. Dear Tom Norton, cannot express fully to you how important drawing with walnut drawing ink is to my artwork. It is a beautiful color. Its application, whether it is with stylus or brush, is superb. With it, one can describe the entire range of descriptive line, from delicate hachures to broad washes of various tonal ranges. I appreciate the advantage of layering. All of this contributes to what the Cinquecento Italians called mystery of surface, and what modern connoisseurs call subsidiary awareness. Another benefit, which is more difficult to describe, the many qualities of the ink lend themselves to being translated into oil painting, which is critical for many of my drawings and studies, no matter what the medium. With best regards, Patrick Connors. Why does drawing give you so much joy? And why has it been a lifelong habit?
It's the magic. If the muse is with you, it just flows out of you. You don't think about it when you're doing it, and afterwards you look at it, and it's just, it works, and I love that rush. There's a live figure there, and she's standing there 8 feet in front of you. She's vertical, and her feet are on the floor, and yet you have to take that and turn it around and put it down on the paper so that it has the same feeling of it. And it's something that it's impossible to do, but you do it anyway. And if you do it right and it comes out, it's just a fantastic feeling. You just keep doing it so that on certain days it's going to work beautifully, and it's just going to sing, and you live for those days.
Karen, is it true that your husband tends to be very much rooted into the specificities rather than generalities?
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it runs in the family. He has a great-grandfather who used to keep a diary of miscellaneous data. And one piece that struck me was he counted the number of steps between his house and the mailbox, and he recorded it in this diary.
And Tom has that tendency.
I think there is that tendency in the family, yes.
I just had dinner with Tom and Karen Norton. He seems a little bit like a Wolverine. Once he gets the desire to do something, he just doesn't stop.
That's correct. He will take it to the end.
My strangely slow speech is because I'm slightly inebriated. The food was very good, and we had a bottle of wine. Tom is an excellent cook, inventor, artist, visionary. Karen is brilliant, wonderful artist, graphic designer, mensch.
If it catches that inner part of him that he really has to express, then he won't let it go. And it might take years.
Speaking of taking years to get something right, I had been waiting decades to get something off my chest. Around the time that Tom was getting a patent on his color calculator, his sister, Virginia Norton Nade, gave me a job. Jenny, why did you put up with me for as long as you did as an assistant sculpture conservator? I was horrible at it.
You were not horrible at it. You were very good. You just talked too much. That's why I gave you jobs where you had to wear a respirator.
Well, for better or worse, the respirator is long gone. So I asked Jenny to tell me about her and Tom's childhood.
The arts were not a part of life at home. The idea that what an artist did could be called work was beyond the comprehension of a family that took pride in the Puritan work ethic. Our parents were dedicated to business and community in a practical, linear way. Reason guided their everyday life. Imagination was for leisure or time off. They were moved by the arts as forces of history and artworks as evidence of the creativity of human beings. But art had nothing to do with the purposefulness of daily life.
But on both sides of their brownstone home lived artists.
This sculpture of King David was done by Oliver O'Connor Barrett, who was our neighbor on the east side of 175 East 94th Street. He was a sculptor, and he had 3 children our age, and we used to go up and watch him work and play with his children, and we all were making things the whole time he was sculpting. Well, the neighbors just north of us were Robert Motherwell and Helen Frankenthaler. They had a big studio on their ground floor just off their garden. And we used to go out into our garden, and they would beckon us and welcome us into their studio, and we could sit there and watch them paint. And I always got a little bit bored, but Tom had an easy-going relationship with them, and he would stick around and ask them questions, and they were just wonderful to him. I think that our parents found it very difficult to understand the big abstractions, but they were very friendly as neighbors. And they did favors for each other, and it was a lovely community. And then on the other side, the row house was owned by a family named Whipper, and she had grown up in that house. She was married to an electrician, and Mr. Whipper had the most wonderful cellar. And Tom and I were invited to come over anytime and work in his cellar. He had cupboards and cupboards of small parts and metal and wood and tools, and we could put together anything we wanted, and then we could take home something we created. And I've always felt that the spirit of Mr. Whipper's, all his little metal parts somehow hovered around Tom's jewelry, the aura of those metal pieces.
I began this film trying to understand Tom's creative process. He recently wrote me a letter, part of which I am now going to read to you. I've always designed and made things. I learned to use tools at an early age. When I got to RISD, I was introduced to new tools, materials, and processes every day. You couldn't make everything, so I learned to take note of new things and store them away until an opportunity arose that fit my using them. It's the way I learned to design things. I'd immerse myself with the problem, review many processes and materials, and then go do something else. A little while later, the solution would pop into my head. It's the ability to free associate with techniques and capabilities, then go do something completely mundane. Bingo, it's called inspiration.